Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Welcome. Today we're talking about alternative options for diabetes and prediabetes. This is a controversial topic because when I went to chiropractic school, we were taught that diabetes type 2 was an irreversible progressive condition that you cannot reverse and you cannot fix and you cannot treat, and you must just do what the medical doctor tells you and take your insulin, and there's nothing you can do to mitigate, change, or fix or correct it. And of course, as the FDA and FTC says, you can't cure, treat, prevent, diagnose. These are the magic words that they use. But today we're using terms like reversal because reversal is not regulated yet. So reversal of diabetes is possible and it happens, and that it basically means cure, where you've turned diabetes around and you've reversed the process so the person is no longer diabetic on their blood work. Now, does that mean they can eat the same? No. No, because the what gets us diabetes is usually type 2 especially, is usually our bodies. So today I'm going to talk to you about type 1, type 2, type 1.5, and type 3, and I'm going to unpack all that stuff for you. So when you look at type 1 and type 2 diabetes, you have to know that type 1 used to be called juvenile diabetes. That was the kind that started with children, and it was usually an autoimmune or genetic type of trigger. Today, we're not so sure that that's a genetic trigger that is just you're destined to have and that there's nothing you can do about it. It seems that some people are certainly more genetically predisposed to trigger an autoimmune reaction where their immune system attacks their pancreas and they can't produce insulin in order to deal with sugar. So that's the type 1, and it began to be called type 1 when adults started to get it too. So it started out as juvenile diabetes and adult diabetes, and then it became type 1 and type 2 because the autoimmune diabetes almost always happened in children, and then it would creeping begin to happen in adults. And that's kind of where 1.5 came from, which was an adult that got diabetes, which was type 2, without an autoimmune component, without their immune system attacking their pancreas. They would just have problems with insulin resistance, and they would have to make more and more and more insulin from their pancreas. But excuse me, but they did not have an autoimmune reaction. They did not have antibodies attacking their pancreas islet cells or beta cells of the pancreas. So that happened even back in Egypt. In Egypt, when people really started to eat wheat quite a lot, that was when the first wheat bellies began to be documented, where people would get swollen bellies. And this is not kwashiorkor necessarily, which is a swollen belly from a protein deficiency. This is a person that gets a swollen belly from just eating wheat and gluten. And many of you have read that book, Wheat Belly. Many of you have had that experience. You've had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You've had all kinds of problems of swelling and gas production and bacterial overgrowth from eating all these refined grains and gluten and corn and other types of things that don't even have any gluten in it. So just to review, type 1 juvenile or autoimmune, type 2 adult onset but not autoimmune, just insulin resistance and a need for sometimes insulin exogenously to take insulin shots, but no autoimmune reaction. And 1.5 is really where an adult gets type 2 diabetes, and then they have something called LADA, which is kind of a late onset adult diabetes, autoimmune adult diabetes, where their immune system kicks in. And you might ask, well, why does the immune system kick in sometimes and give you this autoimmune diabetes or type 1 when you're an adult and you start out as type 2? Well, it's a pretty easy answer. The immune system responds to cytokines and inflammatory markers. So if you have a type 2 diabetes that's caused by eating the carbohydrates and you're getting insulin resistance and you're getting lots of glycation, which means you're inefficiently burning glucose and you're having all kinds of glycated end products, which is essentially burned crispy proteins and burned crispy carbohydrates in your bloodstream and in your cells, that causes inflammation. So the very act of having type 2 diabetes causes inflammation, and some people will trigger their immune system with inflammation. So you'll get a flare of type 2 diabetes over time, and the repeated flares will stress the immune system, cause a release of these cytokines like interleukin 6 and interleukin 17 and TGF alpha and TNF alpha and TGF beta. And that will trigger the immune system to just start attacking your pancreas. And now you've got type 1.5 becomes type 1. There is another type of diabetes, which is type 3.0, and that's considered brain diabetes. We consider most Alzheimer's and most dementias and most mild cognitive impairments to be a type 3 diabetes. Not all of them are. Some of them involve an aluminum toxicity. Some of them involve an infection or an autoimmune response. Some of them involve other types of heavy metal poisons or toxins from glyphosate and its interaction with aluminum. Some of them involve even more complex mechanisms called Lewy body dementia. But the point is, the main difficulty that happens in most of the dementias, especially the early dementias, when a person gets something before the age of 75, is this insulin resistance in the brain. Now, technically, nerve cells don't need insulin to absorb glucose, but if your body has been insulin resistant, you're going to have inflammatory molecules and you're going to have difficulty with burning sugar in your brain, and you're going to have insulin resistance and you're going to have inflammation. So this gives a person lots of debris that's created in the brain, and that debris can be neurofibrillary tangles. It can be different proteins that fold in a different way, both inside and outside the cell. These are called tau proteins, beta amyloid proteins, and they are a target of drug treatment, but it's really not something that we need drugs for. We, excuse me, we just need food. We just need to eat different food. Most of the time, what we need to do is eat less carbohydrates and less refined carbohydrates, more minerals, more saturated fats, and less seed oils. When we do that, we can get better. So the root cause mechanisms here, the patients will usually be craving of carbs. And if they crave carbs, that usually means that they're not efficiently burning proteins and fats. That often means they've got inflammation from refined seed oils that are rancid. They've also got processed foods, and they've also got heavy metals. They may have mold, or they may have chemicals in their environment, and they may have a mineral deficiency. It's extremely common to be deficient, especially in chromium. Now, some people think vanadium is an issue. I'm not sure, but chromium for sure is a real issue. There is another problem of brominated flour. When humans eat flour in the United States, we tend to use brominated flour, which is where bromine, like chlorine, has been added to the flour. This is a toxin, and it makes for not good tasting flour, as well as not good rising flour. It doesn't behave the same way. It's very nice in the bag, and it doesn't clump, and it's got all kinds of other things that make it easy to bake with and easy to combine with other foods. So it's good for food, for processed food, when you want to mix brominated flour with other fats and combine it with other things. But it doesn't make for very healthy, good for you types of flour. GMO is a big problem in the United States. We don't see that in many other countries. Seed oils are a problem. Lectins are a problem. Lectins are things that are in grains that can trigger immune reactions and trigger inflammation and trigger problems with bile production. There are also gluteomorphines and caseomorphines. These are literally morphines that your bacteria in your gut make out of gluten. So if you have a problem with, and it doesn't have to be gluten, it could be other grains, it could be other products. I've seen it in soy. So there are molecules that are produced that are opiates. So if you've got a child that's eating these foods and their gut is producing these gluteomorphines, caseomorphines, soy morphines out of the food, you've basically got a little heroin addict on your hands. And so the kid becomes a holy terror, and we love these children, but man, they can behave in ways that don't make any sense. I've seen kids beat and gouge other kids in order to get their foods and snacks, because they're basically little heroin addicts addicted to their own morphines in their own gut. And if they don't get their hit, they're going to hit somebody else. So you can't blame the children for it. You have to understand that this is a problem of the formation of gluteomorphins and caseomorphins in their gut. Casein is a protein from dairy, and gluten is a protein from whole wheat. Now, there's another problem that is a difficulty, and that's where people say to me, Dr. Pierce, I have crazy cravings, and I don't know what to do with my sweet cravings. And I think I'll just take a no calorie or low calorie sweetener, or I'll take a no calorie soda. Well, there are some problems with that. First of all, a soda that is artificially flavored and artificially colored is going to cause all kinds of neurologic problems and all kinds of problems with insulin. It's a difficult problem for the liver and the kidneys. there are some real difficulties with these chemicals. So artificial flavors, things like sucralose, things like NutraSweet. These are a real problem for me in my practice with my patients, and we have to get people off of them. Just because there's no calories doesn't mean that they're safe, and they're usually causing lots of brain problems. There are a tremendous number of complaints to the FDA every year on NutraSweet and other like products that are similar. We don't want to go into all those chemicals today, but if you can't read it and it's a chemical that has to do with sweeteners, don't eat it. Now, here's where I talk about natural sweeteners. People say, well, what about stevia? Stevia is natural. There's no calories in it. Why don't I just take that? And I say, well, here's the problem. When a person takes a sweet substance in their mouth, even if it's not, has no calories whatsoever, they will get an insulin spike. They're not adding any sugar to their body, but their taste buds are firing to their nervous system a signal that says, I've eaten something sweet. So they're going to secrete insulin. So the patient will get an insulin surge. That insulin surge causes a problem in that it will reduce the blood sugar that they've already got in their blood supply, and they'll become hypoglycemic. So this is really not fun and not smart over time. And we get this thing called reactive hypoglycemia, where the person has high blood sugar and then insulin and then low blood sugar, and then they eat sugar and then they have high sugar and then insulin, and they keep getting this problem. And they often get on their blood work signs and symptoms of both high and low blood sugar. And so, which is it? Are they high or low? Well, they're both. So you can't just rely on this. And what we look for is we look for in the blood work, we take a blood test called fasting insulin and fasting glucose. Fasting insulin changes decades before fasting glucose does. So if your doctor's been testing your fasting blood sugar and says it's okay, have them test your fasting insulin, because fasting insulin is a much earlier indicator of change of insulin resistance than even fasting blood sugar. Also know that when people take their health in their own hands and they try to do this work for themselves, they can and they should, but they might get urine strips to measure their ketones. And I really don't want people to think that urine strips for ketones are accurate. If you're going to be measuring your ketones, which is great, it would be better to do blood. That means you've got to poke your fingers or your toes, and I recommend doing the side of the fingers and toes to get those ketones, because after the first day of ketosis, urine is just not accurate for ketones. So talk to your doctor about insulin tests and sugar tests, and then consider a ketone strip for blood. If you're going to be measuring your ketones and your sugar, use blood, not urine. Lastly, we want to talk about some alternative views on lifestyle. The most important is the macros. Reducing your overall carbs and increasing your fats and protein really helps. You've got to increase minerals. You've got to detoxify. If there's toxins in your life, you can test for those. I've talked about that on many of our other shows and channels, on our other shows on this channel, and our sub channels on this channel. We have different groupings of categories of topics that I've talked about. We also want to talk about the fact that if you are in a transition of trying to get off a lot of carbs, there's several ways to be healthier than you are. So let it be a transition. Don't go cold turkey sometimes. Some people can't do that very easily, and they get very hypoglycemic. And if you're very stressed out, like one of my other videos where I talk about adrenal stress, you can't just go cold turkey and cut carbs and start doing protein and fat, because you need to take care of that tremendous trauma and tremendous adrenal response and tremendous hypoglycemia that happens, where you can really have a rotten time. So what are some of the ways that I advocate people getting off of their carb addiction? Well, number one is take minerals. Number two would be to eat fat with your carbohydrates. Whenever a person is taking in a carbohydrate meal, eat some fat with it, ideally some saturated fat. That will slow the glycemic load or the burden of digesting all of that starch, because the most rapid starch burning is mashed potatoes. If you've got a commercial industrial mashed potatoes, that goes into your bloodstream faster than sugar. It's faster than sugar in an iced tea. So it really is the fastest way of getting sugar into your blood, and it's really dangerous to give yourself rapid sugar unless you're having a medical emergency and your doctor is trying to save you from having a hypoglycemic shock, which is very rare. That's not what you're doing at home in most cases. There are some other things that we can do, which is to try to switch to less processed carbohydrates. Even though I will tend to want to get people off of potatoes and sweet potatoes and yams, I will move them from cereals and grains and pasta to sweet potatoes, yams, and even squashes. And I'll have them douse them in butter, douse them in olive oil, douse them in avocado oil, douse them in bacon grease. This is good stuff. The other thing that I like to use is I'll use berberine sometimes. The supplement berberine very much helps to increase insulin sensitivity. So does chromium. And then we have low carb, high fat meals, low lectin. There's a lectin in wheat called wheat germ agglutinin, or WGA. And this actually binds to the insulin receptor and gives you insulin resistance. So it's really important for many people to avoid wheat or gluten or things that are grain based, especially that are wheat based. And then there is also the autoimmune problem, which is many people have blood sugar problems and diabetes, as well as an autoimmune problem. And I'm here to tell you that there are many, many ways to deal with this. There's many fasting methods. There are many detox methods. There are many elimination diets. There are all kinds of ways to reverse both diabetes and other autoimmune diseases like thyroid problems. You just have to know what you're doing and work with somebody that can help you understand. I want to mention, for those of you that are diabetic right now, you really should work with a doctor to be safe. But there are some very, very powerful ways, like the master cleanse and other types of ways that with medical supervision, people can really, really bring their blood sugars down quite rapidly, so much so that they will modify their medication requirements and must work with their prescriber to reduce their medication and regulate their medication if they're on an insulin pump or if they're on other types of things. But there are doctors doing this, and very heroic, and it's working very well. I really am excited to tell you about Dr. Ken Berry's American Diabetes Society. It's a group that he's started, and please go check out Ken Berry's group, the American Diabetes Society. It's a new group that he's started, which is kind of truth about the human diet, the proper human diet, and assembling people that are really interested in the science of actually reversing this scourge on us and fixing it completely, instead of following the guidelines of the existing diabetes groups, which are really problematic in my view, and are really behind the times and very much in denial. I've also been studying the work of Jack Kruse and Alexis Cowan, PhD. Jack Kruse is a medical doctor, a neurosurgeon, and they're on Undoctrinate YouTube channel, the Undoctrinate Yourself YouTube channel. I love some of their stuff. It's really exciting how they talk about the mechanisms of red light and food and keto and carnivore diets and less carbohydrates and more minerals and more red light and more sunlight and less blue light, and how incredibly important that is for the POMC pathway in our brains, how important UV light can be, UVB especially, how we need to get back into the sun and take care of ourselves again. So diabetes is something that, if it's type 2, it can be reversed. If it's type 1, we're working on it. There's quite a lot of new literature talking about trying to fix type 1, because type 1 assumes that your immune system has attacked your pancreas and killed every last cell that produces insulin. And we must disprove that hypothesis before we progress in that way. If you're going to be truly medical and you're going to be truly responsible, you must, I sound like Del Bigtree, you must, which I love, you must address the issue of, can we assess the pancreas? And on other videos, I've talked about using other types of lab tests to assess the pancreas and see if it in fact is actually completely dead or just mostly dead, and if it can be revived. And there are ways to revive it using stem cells that are exogenous or endogenous that come from within you. And one of the greatest ways to increase stem cells is a carnivore diet and fasting. Those are great ways of increasing your own stem cells at any age, even though we get less of them as we age. There are ways to activate and turn on our stem cells at any age. So please understand that there's lots you can do. There's lots of hope, and don't give up. Thank you.